This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 324 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam. With me, as he always is Cal. Cal, for the time being, this is our last full Batman Caped Crusader review. It's been a really fun month, and we do have one more Saturday. We'll get to what we'll be doing on our last Saturday of the month later on in the show. But for this week, we have one last full review for the fourth episode of the brand new, I guess it's not brand new, it's just regular new now, animated series from DC and Amazon Prime, that being, of course, Batman Caped Crusader. And it's a pretty interesting one to talk about.
That's right. I think the haters will have plenty to talk about as far as maybe having less screen time for Batman in this episode. The stopwatches were out, and they clocked in far less from our last two episodes, I dare say. However, we make up for it, in my opinion, at least, with a very interesting story that pits the police and local politicians against the Batman based on growing opinion of him and them feeling like they're kind of being shown up in certain places. So it's certainly a very interesting one as we review the fourth episode of the series, Night of the Hunters. So we'll get into talking about that in just a second. But I'm sure before we break down the episode with our four categories, you probably have the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, don't you?
That's right, Cal. This is our little housekeeping section before we get into it here. And we'll mention that the official IMDb synopsis is brought to you by the Pod Tower YouTube channel. You can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower right now. Subscribe, and not only will you get every episode that we do every week for the DCAU review, you also get every episode of the ongoing Jump on the Bat-Wagon podcast, which is also reviewing a lot of DCAU cartoons, and also live streams, archives, and other podcasts as well. So a lot of stuff up there. So be sure to go and subscribe at youtube.com/the Pod Tower today. And this is the synopsis for the episode Night of the Hunters, which was written by Ed Brubaker, directed by Christina Sada, with music by Friedrich Weidman, and animation by Studio IAM. And that synopsis reads as such. Detective Montoya is put in charge of a task force assembled by Mayor Jessup to catch Batman, but Gotham is put in jeopardy when detectives Flass and Bullock take matters into their own hands.
Oh, that's a good one.
Good.
Yeah, I give that one a B+. That one's really pretty strong.
Gets a little deeper than your TV guide blurbs, but doesn't give away the whole farm either. So we'll get into our recap of the plot before we give our main thoughts on it and our scores. So we open up with a lovely little framing device, which is that we have a news report we see on our black and white televisions, where a reporter who, according to the credits, is named Jack Ryder. Interesting. Is asking the rank and file citizens of Gotham City how they feel about this mysterious Batman character.
Asking the question on everyone's mind these days, what do you think about the Batman?
That guy who beat up the cops? I don't like him. Not one bit.
My sister and me, we think he might be a vampire.
Well, I say this Batman's got a lot of moxie. About time someone gave these cops a licking.
I'm frightened. That's what I think. I won't go out after dark now. This whole city's gone to hell in a handbasket.
Well, he's breaking the law, ain't he? So they ought to catch that freak and lock him up.
And now he's even attacking our brave police. Well, I say this will not stand. The people elected me to make this a better city, a safer city, a city of law and order. So today I'm announcing a special task force to catch this Batman character and bring him to justice.
And cut to a press conference that the current Mayor Jessup, is hosting, and he's just ranting and raving about how Batman is a stain on the streets of Gotham, and that he's organizing a special task force in order to take care of this problem and put him behind bars once and for all. And he makes it pretty clear as soon as he's out of the earshot of the reporters that this is really Gordon's problem and Gordon's job on the line, and that he had better shape up and get things in order very quickly. And so we see Gordon has put Detective Montoya in charge of this task force, much to the chagrin of Flass and Bullock and some of the other rank and file detectives and cops in this precinct here. That none of them really seem to want to take orders, especially Flass and Bullock, but they are reluctantly put in their place after the debacle where they were both, especially Flass and Gordon Flass and Bullock, because they got beat up, as mentioned. So much to their chagrin, they listen as Montoya lays out a plan. They're going to catch Batman. They know that he seems to have a streak in him. He wants to save people, and so they're going to concoct several scenarios that will hopefully draw his attention. And we cut to that night where we see the police are staging several different crimes, muggings mostly, of various sorts. And each time we see Batman sort of lurking in the area, but he does not engage, as he always is. He always notices that there are some cops in the area, even going as far as to string up two of them and hang them upside down so that their badges come flopping out of their shirts, which is a good little bit. So after one night, they're pretty embarrassed, and Montoya is frustrated with this, noting that maybe they should have had people on the rooftops as well. But her sort of right-hand man in this episode, Detective Corrigan mentions that it probably wouldn't have mattered, and that they maybe need to try something else. And so Montoya and Corrigan and Gordon all discuss things further, and they decide that what they really need is to try to up the ante a little bit. And so the next night we cut to they're actually staging a high-speed chase complete with Tommy guns, and this does lure Batman out as he comes out to try to intervene in the chase between the police and this unmarked car with a couple of guys in classic gangster suits. And as soon as the Batmobile pulls into the chase, then those two wannabe gangsters, also cops, take out their blank ammo and put in real ammo and begin opening fire on the Batmobile. He's able to avoid all of those, which leads him into a roadblock where 4 giant armored trucks are waiting for him. But he's got a switch for that, thankfully, as he flips on the afterburner. This Batmobile, even in the 1940s, does still have, I guess, some atomic batteries that can power up, and the turbines go to speed, and we see the giant fire shoot out the back with his rocket propulsion, his thruster, as I believe it's labeled. That's an Adam West thing too, right? Everything has like a very big button with a label on it.
With a label on it, for sure. Yeah.
I think there's a whole Twitter account that just posts those, but from the Adam West show. But yes, he flips on the thruster and rams through the blockade, knocking out 2 of the trucks. 2 of them stay in pursuit. And then this is an example of, I don't know if this is supposed to be a coincidence or he did this on purpose. But he sort of, we see a civilian on the street who's, I guess he's a paper man. He's unfurling the next morning's paper. He's leaving them out on the street. The Batmobile drives into those paper, and they go flying up into the air and land perfectly on one of the truck's windshields, which of course obscures the driver's vision and causes them to swerve into the other truck, and they're both crashing into a fire hydrant. So Batman gets away once again. Montoya and Corrigan stand on the rooftop looking on, a little bit upset. And to make matters worse, the returning Eel O'Brien, who has a police band radio, we see him, is on the scene to get a picture of the police's mishap. And that's the front page news, is that Batman has not only given the police the slip, but has kind of openly engaged them and embarrassed them. And we get a little bit of Jim in his office here. He's getting kind of just read the riot act by the mayor, including we get some very thinly veiled comments on why Jim Gordon has this job in the first place, at least according to the mayor.
Gordon, Front page!
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I saw the paper.
So what are you doing about it?
Sir, we're doing everything.
I thought I was very clear that catching this masked freak is your top priority.
Yes, and it's got our full attention. I have everyone out on the street.
I want good headlines, Gordon. Wasn't that the whole point of you in that job? Good press?
Sir, we'll catch him. I just...
And as they finish their discussion and Gordon hangs up, Montoya comes into the office and sort of tries to reason with Jim, tells him it's not that bad and that things aren't out of control yet. But Gordon makes it pretty clear not only his job is on the line, but, and I think we kind of touched on this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's, again, just much more overt in this episode, where Gordon just says, like, if I'm gone, you are going back to being like, you're going to be treated really poorly if I'm not the commissioner here. Like, he says that to Montoya, which makes sense based on what we know about that character and the time period this is set in. So again, it's not, you're not getting hit over the head with it, but it's pretty clear what they're saying. And at that moment, Montoya has a little bit of a solution. I think they're discussing it again with Corrigan, the detective there, who they decide that in order to try to track down this Batman, their rank and file stick-ups and car chases aren't working, so they need to bring in a specialist in order to try to get inside the Bat's head. And that brings us to another familiar face making an appearance this week.
My old college professor, Dr. Crane, would say that
this Dr. Quinzel's interesting. Where'd you find her?
Your daughter. They're friends. She's one of Barbara's expert witnesses.
Ah, of course she is.
Yeah, Barb introduced us at our Christmas party, and we kept in touch.
So why all this animosity for the police? Where does that come from? Well, frankly, I think the police are just in his way. His real targets are the criminals. He's punishing them. That's why he's out there night after night. That's his compulsion.
Hey, all this head shrink mumbo jumbo might mean something to you, Doc, but can you just please tell us how to catch this guy?
Sure. Batman seems to have a thing for all these costume creeps that keep popping up, right? Maybe they remind him of himself. Who knows? In any case, that's how you catch him, by using different bait. You need a weirdo.
That's right. It's Harley Quinn, or Dr. Harleen Quinzel, as you mentioned, is the specialist that's been brought in because Montoya says that in order to truly figure out the best way to capture the Bat, they have to think like the Bat and get into the Bat's head. So they've brought Harley in to kind of give a lecture about what she's seen in her analysis of who the Batman is. And it's very clear that Harley is maybe the smartest person in all of Gotham, because she has Batman pegged to right down to it. She's got every in and out of the inside of his brain. He's clearly has some sort of fascination with bats, and she believes that it's honestly his motives are not about embarrassing the police, as some people might believe, but instead it's more about getting to the bad guys and the crazy ones at that, and that those are the ones that are most attractive to him. So with that in knowledge, sitting there in the lecture, despite the fact that they've been rolling their eyes and scoffing and mocking the entire process, especially with yet another female lecturing them, Flass and Bullock take note and realize that, hey, if we take matters into our own hands at this point, we could really get the jump on this and maybe get some good credit for taking down the Batman ourselves. So when Dr. Quinzel mentions that Batman has this attraction, not a romantic attraction, but it's what brings him out and is what he's looking to do to make the bad guys pay she uses a specific word like characters or something like that, like the very special crazies. The Bullock and Flat.
She simply says you need a weirdo.
A weirdo. That's the term.
That's her bottom.
Is that a
line.
clinical? You think that's a clinical term? A weirdo?
She mentioned that, and she's talking about how she thinks there may be some light fetishes at work with Batman's motif.
Sure.
Tonight. All right, yeah, we've heard that one before, especially the Schumacher films.
Listen,
all right.
I'm not saying that all of her dialogue was sourced from Reddit, but there is a significant portion of Harley Quinn or Dr. Quinzel's persona that seems to stem from a very specific type of Batman critic. I'll just say that. So yeah, when as soon as Flass and Bullock hear this, they get the jump on it and decide they got to go find their own weirdo to figure out who they can draw out. So they go survey who's currently being held there, and wouldn't you know it, they come across a guy who's been arrested for arson. And they realize that this will be their chance at this point to draw out Batman. So they pull out this gentleman who they call Firefly, but he corrects them and says his name is Firebug, and decide that they're going to transport him, or to come up with a reason to get him out. They've decided that they're going to transport him to get a psych evaluation. As they're escorting him out, Barbara Gordon arrives at police station and is shocked to see that one of her clients is leaving because she wasn't made aware, and immediately suspects something. So as Bullock and Flass drive off with Firebug in the back of their car, Barbara goes in to talk to her dad and mentions that she was unaware and wanted to know if he was aware that they were escorting him out. And it's at this point that it dawns on everybody that Flass and Bullock have kind of gone rogue and have decided to set a trap themselves. So this sets off Jim Gordon and Montoya in hot pursuit to figure out what's going on with Flass and Bullock. Meanwhile, Flass and Bullock have escorted and are driving Firebug around. They're pretty clearly taunting him with all of the dialogue that they're using, and continuing to goad him and try and taunt him.
Can't you feel it? All of those people out there, longing for the flames, for the truth of the fire to show them.
Hey, Firefly, shut it. No one gives a crap.
It's Firebug.
You know, I tell you, Flass, I'd hate to be a little guy like that in lockup. You need a real scary rep if you want to survive in there.
Yeah, a couple of arsons and a homemade costume ain't gonna cut it.
Did you see his suit? It's like long underwear, but on the outside. And these big bug-eye goggles.
That uniform is fireproof.
Yeah, I saw that. Hey, you put it in the trunk, right?
Yeah, it's back there with his fuel tank dingus.
Wait, is the lock on that trunk still busted?
Dang it, you're right. I keep forgetting to get that fixed.
So you mean anyone could get into that trunk and run off with Firebug's special suit?
Yeah, I guess. Oop. You hear that?
Sounds like engine trouble.
Wouldn't you know, Nuns and Dynamite happen at this point, and they have to pull over because their engine has some quote-unquote trouble. So as they pull over, clearly laying the trap for Firebug to escape, he seizes the opportunity, grabs the lighter, jumps out of the car, steals his equipment out of the trunk, and runs off. And once he does, and Bullock and Flass see him leaving, they fake a fight. Flass has Bullock punch him in the face to make it appear as if they were attacked, and they get their story straight to radio in to tell them that the prisoner has escaped. So another theme that we see here throughout the episode, Flass, he's really the one in charge here. He's the brains behind the operation. He tells Bullock what to do. I don't know that Bullock quite understands that he's being manipulated in the way that he does, because he probably feels like he's an equal partner, but we'll see even through the end of the episode, Flass really does everything he can to not get any of the proverbial dirt on himself, and make sure that if anybody's going to be held accountable for any sort of actions, it's going to be Detective Bullock here. So they radio in their fake story that Firebug overpowered them after they had a flat tire. And then at the same time, that goes out over the radio that the prisoner has escaped while Batman is on a rooftop. So we hear him checking out the radio. Firebug, meanwhile, is sort of donned his costume at this point and is wandering around the streets, and we kind of get a brief look into the psychosis that affects this character as when he pulls his goggles down, he sees an entire world that's on fire. He had previously mentioned in some of his dialogue when he was back in the jail cell that the fire was calling out to the people, and that this is what they desired. So we can clearly see he's not mentally well at this point. He's able to find some cleaning supplies in a basement, some flammable cleaning supplies to fuel his suit, and he decides that his first target is going to be a giant apartment building that has I guess maybe an orphanage attached to it also or something. And there's a lot of kids playing in and around the front of the building, but so maybe it's just an apartment. I don't know. There's a lot of kids playing around, and he decides to set out and go ahead and kick things off and get this party started with a gigantic arson attempt on this apartment building. It's then once the building starts to go up in flames, that's when Bullock and Flass radio in that they need backup. Not only that, but they spot Batman arriving on the scene, as he has also been made aware that the building has started to go up in flames. So it sets up our third act here, Liam, of a final act of attack here, as we get everybody converging in the same place. Gordon and Montoya are on their way to try and stop Flass and Bullock from charging into the flames without his authority. A giant SWAT team has arrived at the building. Eel O'Brien has also arrived at the building. And Batman is there as well, as Firebug is ascending to the top of the building, setting floors on fire as he goes. And Flass and Bullock, despite Gordon warning them not to go in before he arrives, disregard the orders and march on in. SWAT team in tow, as they do their best to try and not only take down the Batman, but also stop the Firebug as well.
That's right. It's just one of those other examples, as the question once said, Cal. A is A, and no matter what universe we're in, there will always be a somewhat inept SWAT team who is going to almost get people killed in an attempt to capture Batman. It's just how it goes. They're on full display here as we see Batman sort of trying to make his way through the flame and smoke of the building. He has a brief encounter with Firebug, who's able to get away. Drops some of the wreckage drops from the roof above, and then Batman notices that there are still people trapped in the building and becomes focused on that as he sees one child sort of run past him. Here comes the SWAT team to open fire. Child barely out of the way as they're opening fire. Just crack team. I know it's kind of the point of it's funnier. It's funnier in BTOS because the cops aren't all portrayed to be like idiot jackbooted thugs, right? But it's still worth noting here that yes, it's another show where just a really inept SWAT team. But yes, so Batman takes care of a couple of those guys, and as Gordon and Montoya arrive on the scene and enter the building themselves, as they make it in, they find a couple of the SWAT members who have been knocked down, and the fire is getting worse. More and more wreckage is falling. So Gordon decides he's going to continue on, tells Montoya to get the other two SWAT officers out of the building. So he continues on. He comes across Batman and pulls his gun on him, telling him to stop. But as Batman turns around, he's actually holding two children in his arms, and alerts Gordon that a third child is still inside one of the apartments. So as Gordon goes and grabs them, they realize that the way back down has now been blocked completely by fire and debris.
Don't move!
There's another one inside.
It's okay, son. I got you.
I can take him down outside.
No, those men will shoot at you. They might not see the kids. Come on, I know these buildings. This used to be my beat. It goes to the laundry room.
What's at the bottom?
Guess we'll find out.
Guess we will. It's safe.
Okay, come on, kids. What are you? All right, everyone stay close.
And Batman offers to take all three children and swing them out of the building and then come back for Gordon. But Gordon notes that the cops would just probably open fire on him. He does mention if they didn't see the children, so he has a little bit more faith in them than I do. But he says that's not a good enough reason. But he reminds Batman, as he said earlier in the episode, that this is his precinct and that he'll be or this is his old beat when he was a cop, and he knows these buildings very well. So he finds a laundry chute and knows this will go all the way down to the basement of the building. So Batman takes two of the kids in his arms and slides down the chute. Thankfully, there's a laundry basket full of blankets waiting there to cushion the fall. So Batman and the two kids get down, and then Gordon and the third kid follow behind as they sort of take care of the kids, make sure they're all right. Gordon turns around and Batman is gone. Meanwhile, we see Firebug back now on the top floor of the building, looking down at all of the chaos he's caused. We see him sort of instinctively still pressing the buttons that release the fuel, but realizing that he's out. At that point, we see that Flass and Bullock have arrived to confront him, and Firebug says since he's out of fuel, he'll have to give up now. And Flass once again tells Bullock, again, as you said, really making sure that Bullock and him are on the same page, points out that if Firebug is arrested, he will likely talk about the nature of his escape. And so that means that he can't make it out of this building alive. We hear a couple of gunshots, and then we see Firebug stagger backwards and fall out of the building down below and crash onto a police car, dead as a doornail.
Very dead.
And we see everyone go and look up, at which point we see Bullock standing very stoically in the window with his gun still drawn, and Eel O'Brien is there to take a picture as Gordon and Montoya sort of reconvene outside as they're sort of wrapping up the crime scene, the fire department now on the scene, and Firebug's body being loaded away in the coroner's van. They ask him if they ask Gordon if he saw Batman inside the building, and Gordon answers no, he didn't, and so that's sort of the end of that. We cut to the next day where Bullock is reading Flass and Bullock. I think I said Bullock again. I mix up these cop names a lot, so apologies. But Gordon is reading Bullock and Flass the riot act, going as far as saying that because they threatened not only innocent people, but also their fellow officers' lives, that he's going to have their badges for this. But they're quite smug and pretty sure that's not what's going to happen, as Bullock pulls a newspaper out of his lapel and puts it on the desk. And we see the shot of him in front of the window with a headline about how the hero cops have saved the day and ended the rampage of Firebug. And just in that moment, of course, the phone rings, and Gordon gets a call from Mayor Jessup.
Gordon? It's Mayor Jessup. I think it's time we made some changes to this task force. These two hero cops from the papers, Flass and Bullock, I want them in charge from now on. But listen, I saw you did some good out there too, Jim. Save some kids.
So we're gonna keep you around for now. Just make sure my guys have whatever they need, and stay out of their way. Understand me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Let me take a wild guess. Was that about us?
He tells him that from now on, Bullock and Flass are in charge of the task force to catch Batman, and more importantly, Gordon's job is now to stay out of the way while they handle things. So he's sort of been checkmated, or at least put in check for the time being. We get a little epilogue scene as he arrives at a local watering hole down the street with Montoya and Barbara already there. Barbara tries to comfort him, and he tells her that he's not licked yet. And that's sort of where we end it for this week. With it's clear what cops, despite whatever anyone's job title is in, there's now 2 cops who are clearly the most powerful in probably the whole city, and they've got the backing of the mayor behind him. So, and meanwhile, we have Gordon having a little bit of a crisis of conscience with how he feels about this mysterious Batman. So, a lot going on as we fade to black this week.
Yes, indeed. Big episode, as we talked about. Lots of cameos here. Lots of interesting things. We didn't even talk about some of the other ones that we'll talk about in visuals, but I'd say it's pretty undeniably a Jim Gordon focused episode. It's Gordon. I mean, he doesn't have the most screen time. I think that would probably go to Bullock and Flass if we were stopwatching this. But I think this very much sets up Gordon's relationship with not only the mayor and his kind of how, and as you mentioned, how and why he was kind of put into that position. So it kind of gives us his perspective, not only the pressure that he's feeling from people that are above him, the pressure that he's working on, because his goal, as he mentions, is to clean up Gotham. Like he really has a passion. He's not just there to collect a paycheck and be, as the mayor mentioned, quote unquote, good press. He's there to do a job. He's there to make a difference. He's there to be more than just a black man in the commissioner's role.
Yeah, he talks about wanting to, and again, I think this is not to make any real world parallels, because we know those don't exist in superhero stories and never have. But
correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very common topic, especially over the last 5 to 10 years of when it comes to police brutality and police reform, and is it possible to be, and that's not just in police departments, I should say, that's probably at every level of government, federal and local, of is it possible to be a part of that system and change it from within, or do you sort of slowly succumb, either because you're beaten down, sort of like Gordon is in this episode, and forced to play along, or do you become corrupted by the system yourself? So yeah, I think it's a really, you touch on some very strong real world parallels here in this one.
Yeah, for sure. And then he's trying to do that work, and he's facing the pressure from above him. I don't know that he doesn't come out and say that he has a strong opinion against Batman, for or against. It's interesting. We start the entire episode off with lots of people sharing their opinions on Batman, but we don't really get a stance from Gordon. That's probably narratively intentional, I'd say.
Yeah, he mentions wanting to have focused more on, they mentioned Boss Thorne is out there expanding his territory in the Narrows, but I've got to focus on a guy in a Halloween costume. Like that's really the only opinion we get out of Jim, one way or the other, on Batman.
And it's because he's getting this political pressure. It's not because of it. He feels that Batman is hurting or necessarily helping, it seems, the cause that he's really interested in, which is cleaning up the police force and stopping crime. So it's very much a Jim Gordon focused episode. We certainly flesh things out and lay some threads down for what's going to continue here with both Bullock and Flass being kind of put in this position of power. We learn about their sort of dynamic as a duo, pun intended. As I mentioned, kind of, which plays out later on towards the end of the season. And I think story wise, I think it was okay to not have as much Batman. I could have stood for another scene or two of Batman doing some detective work, to sort of follow, to figure out, other than just like he's listening on the police band or Alfred is listening on the police band and radios him when Firebug.
We get that brief scene where Gordon catches him in the police precinct.
Yeah,
which I don't know if we mentioned that, but it's a
really neat scene.
Yeah, it's awesome because there is this moment where Gordon opens the door and they just kind of stare at each other for a minute before he then, Gordon finally does pull his gun and sort of give chase to him as Batman flees. But it's a really tense little scene. But yeah, other than that, he's kind of just there for the third act. And again, we see him sort of intentionally avoiding the fake crimes that the cops are trying to put on to catch him.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about it last week. It will probably continue to talk about it when we do the reviews in the future of future episodes. But people have complained that Batman doesn't get enough screen time, and I really think my thought process as I continue to think about that is that I don't think people are looking or remembering Batman the Animated Series as well as they think they do. Because as we've talked about, some of the most heralded and favorite episodes of that series didn't always have a ton of Batman on the screen. You learn more about the psychology of these other characters or some of the supporting cast, or you delve inside the mind of some of the villains and the weirdos, as Dr. Quinzel put. Like, some of those are the best episodes and most universally loved episodes. So I understand it's new. The name of the show is Batman Caped Crusader. It's not Gotham. It's not, it's not Batman and Friends. It's Batman Caped Crusader. So there's a level of expectation, and there are people that probably call themselves fans of Batman the Animated Series that have not watched it since they were very young. So they have a nostalgia goggles that think that every single episode was about, Batman was featured in 20 minutes of the 22-minute episodes. With that said, so that my one critique is, yes, I think you could have had a little bit more Batman in this, but I also think narratively the story that you're going for, Mr. Brubaker, who is obviously a heralded comic book writer, and we were very excited when he was named as a writer, and he gets producer credit on the show. I think that he's kind of giving you that perspective of the police department, not all that different from the POV episode of Batman the Animated Series, where you have it's literally the POV of the supporting cast, and how they see Batman, and Batman is there, and he's very much, this is very much a, what do the police do in the city? How do they act? What are their interactions together? What is their, Bullock and Flass versus this, Gordon and Montoya? What does their dynamic look like? What is Gordon's place in the department? All that is set up by how this episode rolls on, and Batman really can't fit in there other than this person that is kind of running a parallel to what's going on at the GCPD, especially right now. He doesn't have that friendship or that relationship with Gordon or anyone at the department really yet. So kind of understand why he's not in it. With that said, they work, like, you open yourself up for sure for this episode for having little Batman on the screen. All that to say, I think the episode is good. I think it's fascinating. I think the little twist at the end where Bullock clearly does the evil thing, shooting the defenseless weirdo who's giving himself up. Doesn't even, I don't think he's doing it to cover himself, but it works out to make him a hero, an unintended hero, and then, launches him to this platform where he and Flass get additional power out of it. It certainly is not a feel good at the end of the episode, which is a good storytelling device. So I like that. The plot is fine. I ended up giving it a 7 out of 10 for for this week, I think it's good. I think maybe some more Batman. Maybe the flip side, you could have talked about Batman or shown him kind of responding to this new public opinion, because now that he's being shown attacking the police or whatever, you could have kind of given his side, even if it's just he doesn't care, he's disinterested, he's focused on making all the weirdos pay. You could have kind of shown that flip side of it, but again, that's not what Mr. Brubaker wanted to do. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for me. What about you?
Yeah, hey, I actually went with the exact same score of a 7 out of 10. Yeah, I think what this episode does, we've already kind of touched on it. Like I said, the plight of Gordon in this episode is really interesting, as far as this sort of rock and a hard place he's put between, where, like we said, at the very least, he doesn't see Batman as the main problem with the city. and he wants to clearly to focus on other things, but he's sort of being forced to. And then as they can't seem to track this guy down, that everybody involved is getting a little bit more desperate, to the point where things escalate the way they do. I thought that's really good. There's actually a tweet I saw from it's a guy named Rainey Ovale, who I believe works on a sports talk show on Amazon Prime, and has also, I think, worked other places in the television industry. But he mentioned specifically how struck he was by the way this episode sort of tackles what we've already talked about, that being that Gordon, is portrayed as Black in this series, Montoya being, both Latina and, a queer person, as we find out in later episodes. And just talked about how the line where Mayor Jessup says something about how they're not getting any good press, and isn't that why you're in this job in the first place, to Gordon. And he just so I just wanted to read a little bit of that real quick, where he said, Jim Gordon being Black in this series, and this being a 40s noir setting, makes me appreciate lines like that, because whenever characters are race swapped, they're written exactly the same as they would have been if they were white, which is a disservice to the character in two ways: making the original fans get insanely weird about said character being Black now, and feeling like an inauthentic instance of representation. So he kind of appreciated that they both did address it in this way, but didn't do it in a overt cartoonish way. So I thought that's good perspective. Again, not something necessarily that we on our own would have thought about, but I think it is worth pointing out that is touched on. I've seen that a little bit as a criticism of the series, is that the series has these minority characters, but doesn't really address them, what it would be like to be a person of an African American, or a gay person or whatever in the 1940s in what is essentially New York City. And I think this is the first episode, and I could agree with that for the first 3 episodes. I think that's a fair critique. So I think this episode is a step in the right direction, as far as at least it's there. It's not there aren't anybody in white. There's nobody in white robes burning torches in front of Gordon's office.
Sure,
but it is touched on that his job will be is on the hot seat in a way that it probably wouldn't be if he was a white man. So I think that's
not only that, but as we mentioned, like, it's very clear that the mayor makes it a point saying that he named him as essentially a political chess move in order to try and get some good publicity in an election year.
Absolutely.
Like, he's running up against someone, a young challenger that is, pointing out his flaws. So he's made a specific calculated move in order to get positive press at a time where it behooves him, which is why when he calls and reams him out and gives him, the third degree about the negative press that the police and task force that he launches at the beginning of the episode, why it feels very personal, and why it's very, like, the mask is off at that point. Like, he starts off at the press conference just kind of being subtly like, hey, did you see that? Take some notes. More subtle and as threatening. And then by the end, by the end of that point, when the police have been humiliated a second time by Batman, the gloves are off. He's yelling, he's screaming, he's telling him he's going to fire him if things don't change or if they don't get a solution to this problem.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the most interesting stuff in the episode. And like you said, there's not a lot of Batman to go around in this one. He's very active and reactive in the third act, but it's not really a character episode that focuses on him at all. So with that in mind, I think the only other note, we'll talk about some of the, as you said, there's a lot of cameos in this episode we'll get to in a second, in visuals. Did want to mention, we'll drop it here for lack of a better place to drop it. Harleen mentions that she had an old professor named Professor Crane. So,
yes, and more world building that's going on. Yes. I guess we might as well list them all here
this is our bridge. This is our bridge to the visuals here.
That's right. The non-visual ones are ones that you may not have picked up on, but there's an officer, Romy Chandler, that is mentioned. That, along with Marcus Driver, those are both characters that were created by Ed Brubaker and the episode writer from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, yes, Greg Rucka. Both created those characters. They were involved, so they're responsible. They slipped them in as little cameos. I don't know if they're in other episodes. I don't remember noting that, but as we already mentioned, Jack Ryder also was there. Jim Corrigan also there. And then I guess visually we can talk about the very first and maybe the most obvious one that I saw people pick up on the day that this was released, but a certain reporter and a photographer that are often linked together in DC Comics lore also making an appearance, not only in the press conference given by the mayor at the beginning, but then later on asking some questions. It certainly appeers to be a Max Fleischer Superman era Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, Liam.
That's right. Which is that's interesting, isn't it?
They're not named.
No, but it's her.
It's definitely her.
You can look it up. I don't know. Maybe she's on assignment from another paper. Who knows? But that is a great little one. I did just want to mention. So I think a lot of these characters, Marcus Driver, Romy Chandler, and I believe the other one is Ethan Cohen, who I think has already been featured in a couple of episodes.
Oh, you're right.
They all, I believe, first appeared around the time of the Gotham Central series that was co-written by I believe Greg Rucka and Mr. Brubaker. Actually, Rick Burchett is co-created Mr. Cohen, but a lot of them, that was like in the early 2000s, I believe that series started. So so a lot of I think a lot of these characters have been sprinkled in there, and it may just, I think this is the first episode where most of them were named. I think Cohen got named before, but or at least in the credits of a previous episode, because he does have a couple of voice lines, but worth mentioning that there's, which I'm sure, again, not a coincidence with, as you mentioned, both Mr. Rucka and Mr. Brubaker working on this series. So a fun litany of Easter eggs there. And now we can get into our main course of visuals and animation this week. Interesting episode. Firebug himself, the design is not, I would say his costume is not particularly interesting. It's just like a gray bodysuit with goggles. It looks like a stripped down version of one of these fire guys. There's like 8 of them in DC. There's a lot of ice guys and a lot of fire guys.
I was gonna say it could be Heatwave, it could be Firefly, it could be it's a gray suit with goggles, and he's got a tank on his back. I will say this, that when he's up on that floor at the end, and we'll talk a little bit more about his design in just a second, but when he's up on that top floor at the end and Bullock walks in, and they initially just show him and he's playing with his little dispenser, like they're letting you know that he's out of juice. I'm pretty sure, I couldn't find a match, but I'm pretty sure that was probably storyboarded off of some Spider-Man panel by Steve Ditko, because the Spider-Man web shooter looks very similar to that contraption. So the fact that he has to hit that button in that same exact way that Spider-Man does to use his web shooter. And of course, we know the influence of Ditko and everybody that had on the creators of the show. I would dare say that was probably an influence there. I'd be willing to put a couple dollars on that one. But the rest of the design for Firebug, Liam, we actually had someone weigh in. Speaking of one of the creators or the producers of this show, Mr. James Tucker, I'd say like colleague of the show via Twitter, weighed in this week. Reached out to him just for kicks and giggles. I wanted to know because Firebug, who by the way is a creation attributed to Len Wein, who is unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but worked on Batman the Animated Series. He's in comics for decades and
did a lot of work on Wolverine, one of those guys that should have been a millionaire and wasn't.
Yep. I also saw that he did work on some of those other Marvel cartoons in the 90s also. So a comic book a name, if you know, you know, but he's credited with creating Firebug, and Firebug's look is not this like stripped down gray suited version of the character. So I reached out to Mr. Tucker via Twitter/X and asked him if there was any sort of evolution of this character, if he at any point maybe resembled the traditional Firebug look, or if there was anything that he could tell us about the design. And he was kind enough to respond and say that Bruce Timm was the one who did the initial rough design on the character, and character designer for the show, Derek Charm, was the one who did the final turn and clean, and that it pretty much ended up as it was first conceived. He also threw in this neat little tidbit because, as we've mentioned each and every week, the noir era of films that both Mr. Tucker and Mr. Timm are fans of are huge inspirations, both on not only the setting, the time period, but a lot of the characters are based off of certain actors and actresses. So Mr. Tucker was able to throw in that Peter Lorre was, and his character specifically in the movie M, was the influence for Firebug's look for this episode. So shout out to Mr. Tucker. Thanks for weighing in and giving us a little peek behind the scenes on that as well. So little neat little history lesson there on the creation of the Firebug character for this episode.
Yeah, it's great. And by the way, if you don't know the name Peter Lorre, you probably, if you ever watched like Looney Tunes or Animaniacs, for whatever reason, he was like shorthand for like ugly famous guy for several years of Warner Brothers animation. So like if you just Google Peter Lorre cartoon, you'd be like, oh yeah, oh that's who they were referencing. Yes, it was the guy from the 30s who, his eyes are a little bit further apart and therefore drew him really cruelly. But yeah, funny. That is a funny and yes, him when he's out of the costume, like, but his his like the way his hair sits and everything and his eyes, yes, I can totally see that inspiration there. But yeah, I think as far as the episode goes, for the big visual notes, not a ton of action in this first. I do like the sequence, the sort of montage of fake crimes. It's kind of fun watching the cops be kind of bumbling and kind of get outsmarted. The chase scene, this is maybe the most work put in by the digital effects team on an episode so far, or a 3D CGI effects, because we have the big car chase in the first act, and then from what I could tell, I think all of the fire is CG as well. And I think I don't know, maybe I've just adjusted for years, having watched when they were sort of early on implementing this technology in some of those like Batman Beyond and Justice League episodes, but I think it looks pretty good here. Like I think the fire looks pretty good, and I think the chase scene I think has it feels a little weightless, but I do like the bit where he rams the trucks. I think that has a little, like, it's hard because you can, I think especially if you're looking for it, which we are, because we're doing these a little bit more analytically than your average viewer might, you can definitely tell that they're not being done in the same traditional two-hand animation style that we might be used to. But I think I'm settling into it, and I think the car chase scene stands out as kind of a highlight for me.
Yeah, I made that note too. The only thing I don't like is the impact. Like after he impacts the armored cars, they kind of spin around, and that's where the weight for me is kind of lost. Like the
Feels like
actual
we're clicking and dragging at that point.
Right. Yeah. It just kind of feels like they both kind of just swing at a speed that doesn't match everything else. There's just like some sort of I don't know, there's just something there that your brain just can't, your brain notices that there's a difference there. I don't know. But yeah, I as someone who has been critical of the use of CGI, especially in some of those Justice League and Justice League Unlimited episodes, having the cell shading on top of it certainly makes a big difference. This obviously taking place in a very, very dark visually. It's at night, and then darkness on top of that, just from the shading and the whatever filter that they're using. Does mask things when they're just kind of moving at a normal pace. But once that impact happens and they kind of spin out, that's when it's like, I wish that something else. Kind of wish that they had that sequence in hand drawn, but that's just not how it's done anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that whole sequence, as you mentioned, the bit where you don't quite get it right away as to what's going on. You're kind of just thrust into this guy that's holding up, trying to steal her purse, and then you realize when they stop that it's the police, and then you go to the next one and the same thing is happening. So you kind of and as you mentioned, when he strings up the two cops and their badges fall out from underneath their ties, I thought that was a really fun little bit. Batman looks cool in that scene also because he's sitting on top you only see him for a brief second. He strings the guys up and then they flash up to the top of the light post and he's sitting there with his cape flowing in the wind before jumping away. Thought that was pretty neat. But the scene with the guy, I mean, the next scene that we've just been talking about, where the cops, do the kind of the side slide, and then they pull out their Tommy guns and they're shooting out the side of the car into the Batmobile. It's like, this is done incredibly well. It's very cinematic. It looks like something you would see in a live action movie, based on how everything is kind of laid out with the guys, then the following the bullets to hit the front of the Batmobile, the cops in pursuit behind him, all of that. I really like that sequence. I also noted that was a strong one as well.
Absolutely. And then like I said, we have kind of our big third act. Like I said, we already kind of touched on it in plot, so we don't need to go into it in depth, but I just like that sequence of Gordon opens his door and Batman's just staring there, which I think we talked about back in the first episode. I like that this Batman gets caught. He's not a magic, like I said, I think I said this in the first episode, he's not a magic ninja. So it's like, he didn't think anyone was there, he didn't know, and so, but he has this very sort of calm demeanor. He doesn't freak out. He kind of just stands there for a second, and then then you see Gordon go for his gun, and then he takes off and he chases him up the stairwell. And as Gordon makes it to the roof, there's a big old spotlight on the roof of police headquarters that looks very similar to one that may have been on the roof in another Batman animated series, but inconclusive if whether or not a big decal could be placed over top of that. Inconclusive whether or not that's the case on this one, but I thought noticing that I was like, oh, that's definitely just the bat signal design without the bat on it. when Gordon realized that. Yeah, and then we have the third act. Like I said, I like, there's a little bit of Batman coming in and out of the smoke of the building when it's on fire.
Before we get to the actual sequence, how about the sequence where Firebug pulls the goggles down and you kind of see this flip back and forth between the real world as him kind of it's very creepy in a way, because he's standing there and he's watching these kids play football on the street, and he pulls the goggles down. The building starts to appear like it's on fire. and you're like, okay, but then he looks at all of the people and the kids running around, and they turn into these like weird human flame people things, like that are just like also playing with flames and running around, and like as I mentioned, like you really get the POV shot of his psychosis, essentially, of like this is what he views the world, or how he wants to view the world, or what have you. Like the world needs to be this way, so he needs to set fire. It
He
is.
puts the goggles on, and everyone turns into those characters from, what was that Pixar movie, Elemental?
Oh yeah, forgot about that movie.
Yeah, that movie that was like, it's a flop, and then it made $1 billion 3 weeks because it was in theaters for longer than 3 weeks. Anyway,
imagine that.
I was like, oh, it looks like, but that is a really, really great sequence. Just the transition. I think we talked about that. I think that one shot was in that first trailer they released. I remember us talking about that on one of our episodes. But yeah, that little transition of where we get to his POV and the build when he slides the goggles down over his eyes is great. And it just gets creepier and weirder as it goes. And then there's almost like when he finds like the turpentine and whatever he's using to mix his, to mix into to put into his tanks, and he starts to light it. It almost has this almost like operatic, like he's beginning to dance or something, like the way his arms sort of stretch out as he begins to light everything on fire. It's this weird kind of exertion that he does. Like he's a really like weird, disturbed guy, which is obviously the point. But I think that whole sequence of him suiting up and then beginning to light the fire is definitely a visual highlight. And then we have our third act. We've got Batman versus the SWAT team briefly. We've got Batman and Gordon teaming up to save the kids, which I think is a pretty fun sequence. And then we talk about breaking BTAS rules and all of that. I mean, we don't see the bullets go through the guy's chest, but we hear the gunshot. And again, talk about sometimes theater of the mind is sometimes much better than if you actually did just animate it and show it all. We hear the gunshots, we're looking up at the window, we hear the gunshots, and we see Firebug fall out of the window and just sort of slowly fall all the way down, and then you get the big sudden stop as he smashes onto the hood of the car. Really, really stiff. It is a brutal way to see him in, and then you get everyone sort of slowly looking back up to see Bullock standing with the gun drawn, and kind of a new take on an old BTAS trick too, where I think he's painted into the background mostly, and I think just his face is animated in that shot with Bullock standing in front of the window.
And it sort of mirrors. There's a shot, maybe I think it's right when the police arrive to the building. They do a very similar thing with Firebug in the window. The window is not busted out. He's just kind of standing there, and he also appears to be painted or have mostly painted, with the background, the CGI fire kind of going on in and around him in the smoke. So it's that sort of pairs with that. In the one scene, it's the villain, it's the bad guy that's setting the fire. In this, it's also a villain, but he's obviously portrayed more as or the perception is that he's a hero, even though he's also a villain. So maybe it's a little bit like poetry. It rhymes. You have you have two shots there, sort of one shot calling back to the other shot of the villain. So that whole sequence is great. Speaking of Batman, the animated series no-nos, I don't know that there were too many times where Batman was allowed to physically punch police officers or smash their faces into railings or walls.
Zero, I think, right? I think that's
I think we talked to a former producer on that show pretty recently, episode, and they mentioned that was thing that was allowed. So he gets to beat up at least Ford team here, who, as you mentioned, they are just, they're in rare form. Their gloves are also in this new era of Caped Crusader. with no regard for who is or isn't around them. But both of the sequences where Batman take down the police officers, I thought were really great. That one in particular, where they fire at him with the kids behind him, to draw their fire away, he runs up the stairs and then jumps over the railing to come down and punch them in order to draw the fire away from the kids, which I kind of like. We certainly learn, speaking of Batman maybe not being the super secret ninja either, he is seen in the smoke briefly. I like that. It's like a catch it if you our two detectives, Flass and Bullock, think they see him, and then they go into the smoke. But it's not just Batman's disappeared. There's an explanation for where he is. He's kind of braced himself in the ceiling in order to escape from them. So I like that they showed this as a reasonable explanation for how he escaped so quickly. And then when Batman and Gordon get to work together for the first time, that's a pretty interesting scene because as you mentioned, just 3 scenes earlier, Gordon is opening fire on Batman, chasing him up a set of stairs off of a roof, and now he sees that Batman is here clearly to help as he draws his gun on him, but Batman just does this slow turnaround where he reveals that he has a kid in his arms, or 2 kids in his arms. And then at that point, it's like Gordon decides he's gonna, all right, to get everybody out of this building, we got to work together. So I thought that visual was great. Also, I will also mention this: the Gotham Gazette is certainly giving main character energy, isn't it, Liam? It's they're really doing the spinning newspaper gag over and over again. It's effective. It certainly is a way to kind of let you know what the to set the tone for the next scene, or kind of put a bow on the end of a scene. Yeah. I think we do it maybe 3 times this episode, and it really certainly punctuates that. We have more of the clippings. We actually have a clipping from last week's Gotham Gazette, the drawing that the police released that we mentioned was based on a panel from the first Batman issue drawn by Bob Kane. Yeah. And we learned this week that along with there's like another headshot were both done by Bruce Timm. So imagine that. That guy might have a future drawing Batman. What do you think?
Yeah, just maybe. I did want to mention our ever listener Scotty did mention that Batman #1, that's actually a reprint of I believe a collection from Detective Comics 33. So apparently it was reprinted for that first issue of Batman #1. But yes, that's where that I
shout out to Scotty.
Yes, always bringing the comic receipts. Love that dude. But yes, that's there. And then there's another shot. We talked about, we were kind of trying to match that one up. There's it almost looks like a head sketch, like you might ask someone to draw you for a commission at a Comic-Con or something. But it was which, according to the people that worked on the show, was also done by Bruce Timm, but it's kind of from a unique perspective. It's not like the head-on shot where he's looking down, sort of like maybe the most iconic Bob Kane Batman drawing. So I'm not sure if that's from a specific panel as well that we just couldn't place from one of the early detective issues or what. But yeah, that's a fun little note.
Tweet at us, listeners, if you have an idea what panel that is. Scotty, if you're out there, we'll put the challenge down right now. Find the panel.
That's right.
The only other thing I'll mention, or wanted to mention, was we talked about how Batman doesn't have a ton of screen time, but I feel like he really maximizes his screen time by just looking badass in every single scene that he's in.
I was going to say, the bit
jumping out the window.
That was exactly where I was going. Yeah,
go for it.
Jumps. As he's eluding Flass and Bullock, and then is trying to get up to the next floor to look for more civilians, and also to try to find Firebug. Yeah, he runs, leaps backwards out of a window, breaks the glass, fires the grappling hook, and zips up further into the building, and then crashes through another window. Awesome.
So cool. Feels like he now, I know that maybe his concern was because he ran into some police that were coming up the stairs, I think, at that point, which is why he decided to go up that route. But it really felt like he's just showing off. He just wanted to do something cool.
I think sometimes he just wants to be cool, and that's fine.
Yeah,
don't we all?
that's okay. Yeah, he saved all the people. Like, everybody got saved. Nobody died other than Firebug. So everybody's fine.
Absolutely. So with all that in mind, I do think this, while we don't get a lot of traditional superhero action, at least until that third act, I do think it's a very visually interesting episode, and I ended up settling on a pretty strong 7 out of 10 for my visual score.
Yeah, I went with the same exact score myself, 7 out of 10. Still getting used to the animation style. I will, again, make note that there were multiple scenes where characters just don't blink. I think there was actually one scene that I noted, the scene where Gordon and Montoya are driving the car to get to the site, and he's like ranting about being upset at Flass and Bullock. Like, he blinks once in that scene, and I was like, that's all I'm asking for. Like, just once or twice. You don't have to blink every 30 seconds like a normal human, but just, like, please give me some depth with these characters. Why it's so weird that they don't blink. But yeah, that's that's a follow-up from last week's commentary of these characters don't blink, and it makes them feel like aliens sometimes.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think that's I know you mentioned that in a previous episode, so I think that's a fair point to keep raising, especially in an episode like this that we mentioned is so dialogue focused, so focused on these character beats with Gordon and Montoya and whoever in the precinct. Yeah, you I don't think it's wrong to ask for a bit more traditional emoting. So that's something to keep in mind as we move on to our next category, which is music. Once again, Mr. Frederick Weidman, apologies if I'm butchering the first or last name, responsible for composing the music this week. Only 2 tracks on the official soundtrack specifically made for this episode, apparently. Most of the other episodes we've talked about so far, I think, have had 3 each. So less original music. We do get a lot of that Batman theme brought in his appearances. But I think obviously the standout for this week, Cal, is the Firebug theme, which comes with a little xylophone and, perhaps most creepy of all, a very like haunting children's choir singing along to the theme. It's only a couple of notes, but it is kind of the refrain that basically from when he gets the suit out of the trunk to the end of the episode, it kind of follows the rest of the episode.
Yeah, it really crescendos in that, when he's put on the suit and he pulls down the goggles, this kind of swell happens. And as you mentioned, when he's in the basement mixing his chemicals together, this is what it invoked in my thought. It isn't visually or even musically the same, but it's very much that reminded me tonally of the scene in the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie, where he's just sort of dancing around classically. Like you said, it would not be out of place to see that, to have had this character seemingly dance around to music that only he could hear. Yes. But yeah, there is this crescendo that happens, and then as he just sort of sprays the fire, and the basement that he's in begins to catch fire, that chorus comes in, and you really hear those voices come in, and continues to crescendo. And that's the main music beat, that other than the car chase sequence, there's some standard sort of frenetic sounding frantic music that accompanies the chase sequence of the cops and the Batmobile and everything that's involved in that sequence. It is, though, very, very dialogue heavy, as we mentioned. So the music sort of lays out, which is a good thing, I think, because it really does allow the voice actors and the voice acting to really shine through. The only other musical note that I had, obviously, there's a very sort of haunting tone to when Gordon and Bullock and Flass are discussing ultimately that they have to kill Firebug, and the shots sort of ring out and the glass breaks, and as you mentioned, there's just sort of this sudden stop when the character hits the car, that really kind of hammers home the wow, we just saw a guy get murdered by the police. So yeah, that's very that's really the musical notes that stood out for me. There is some sort of just like filler and some stuff that kind of accompanies our final scene with Barbara walking in to kind of speak with and console Jim, even though Jim is the one that kind of consoles Barbara in the midst of it. But yeah, that's kind of what I had as far as notes were concerned. There isn't that moment sticks out as like a specific theme, but unlike last week where you had sort of the traditional recurring theme or sound that followed the characters throughout the entire episode, this episode doesn't really have that quite as much because our main quote unquote villain is introduced about 3/4 of the way through the episode, and then you really only have that one scene where he's able to you're kind of able to showcase that. So it's good. I think that scene would be very different if you didn't have a effective piece that was accompanying it. It would not feel the same sort of dread and impact when he puts the goggles on and sees the kids and then goes into that basement and mixes the stuff. It all fits that and then crescendos at the right point. But the rest of it, there wasn't really anything that I felt that stuck out as a theme for characters or particular anything other than some of the chase sequences that we see. So I went with 6 out of 10 for my music this week. It's good. It does everything that it needed to do, but I just think music this week wasn't the main focus for the majority of the episode. So it just didn't have as much to do or much impact.
Fair enough. Yeah, I went just 1 point higher with another 7 out of 10. I think all my scores have been 7 so far. But yeah, not much to disagree with as far as what you said. I just think that Firebug, like I said, the children's choir was a really inspired touch on that. It's really just ominous and creepy as that keeps kicking in and ratcheting up throughout the episode. So
sure,
good job by Mr. Wyman on that one. And that will move us to our final category here, Cal, which of course is voice acting. A lot of regulars now that we're getting used to on our 4th episode of Caped Crusader, and quite a few guest stars. Some we've already talked about, and some other familiar names in the cast as well.
That's right, Liam. So we'll kind of run through these pretty quickly. We had James Arnold Taylor, who's playing the voice of Marcus Driver. We had Roger Craig Smith, who probably most famously has played the Dark Knight himself in one of the Arkham games.
That's right. In Arkham Origins, the prequel game, and I think he's actually coming back to voice him in the Arkham VR thing that's coming out.
Arkham Shadow.
Yes, I believe he's also voicing Batman in that. So
he had a Batman voice that was like at first start, I was like, "Is that Kevin Conroy?" And I was like, "Oh no, that's not Kevin Conroy." So yeah, that's a fun little cameo there, having somebody that's
Dietrich Bader, not the only ex-Batman in our cast this week.
That's right. So yes, Mr. Roger Craig Smith. Not a ton asked for him to do, but he does come back. Spoiler alert! In another episode, kind of playing a much larger role. We had William Salyers playing Mayor Jessup. That's an interesting one because speaking of video game roles, Liam, he probably most famous for his role as Dr. Otto Octavius in the very popular Spider-Man game that came out about 6 years ago or so, the PS4, Xbox, everything, wherever else it came from. I guess maybe it didn't come out for Xbox, probably just PS4, right? Because it's Sony
exclusive. Yep.
So just a Sony thing. Yeah, he played Dr. Octopus in that fine game. That was a big big
Peter
hit.
Parker's normal professor friend who's definitely not going to get 4 big metal arms burned into his back.
It just happens to be named Otto Octavius. All right.
That's right. No spoilers on our end.
That's right. We don't share those here on this show. That's for sure. But yes, he's interesting. I think as we mentioned, what stood out to me is that he plays this sort of he has this sort of subtle threat at the very beginning of the episode, kind of under his breath after he's talking about how he was elected to bring a special era of law and order, and he's there to be a very specific type of politician, and how dare Batman attack our fine police officers, is what he says. And so he's really putting on this politician speech voice, and then he's subtly threatening Gordon under his breath, and then, as we mentioned, that escalates to the point where once they're getting negative bad press, he's verbally, like, he's just screaming into the phone. And it's like, I mean, it's Looney Tunes level of like character screaming into a phone, but it absolutely fits for this character at this point, because again, we're like, he's becoming unhinged because he's, his power or his potential, this could take a potential hit in the polls because of this, what he feels is inept leadership by this person that he didn't really want in this place of power anyway, but picked thinking that it was going to win him some brownie points.
I think he's fun. Like I said, it's a small role. Just playing like a blowhard, blowhard politician. Very, very publicly boisterous, but very privately. As soon as the press conference over, he's like, "And that's actually going to be your problem," and and just kind of pushes it off on Gordon, and kind of just intervenes when things are going poorly. So, does a good solid job in a limited role.
That's right. And continuing on here, we have, speaking of Spider-Man, the video game, Yuri Lowenthal, once again, he's playing the voice of Officer or Detective Cohen for this episode. Not a ton for him either, but fun that both he and Doc Ock from the same game happen to be in the same episode.
And just to self-correct, it's Eric Cohen, I think, not Ethan Cohen. So don't.
Oh, gotcha.
So if you correct me, just be aware that I corrected myself, and you haven't listened to the whole episode yet.
Somebody's live tweeting the episode at you.
I'll know that you haven't heard the whole episode if you tell me actually it's Eric Cohen.
That's funny. Continuing on with our cast here, of course, the very famous Tom Kenny is once again back as E.L. O'Brien. SpongeBob SquarePants himself here in America is back as E.L. O'Brien. Not as much for him to do this week, but nice to see him once again pop up.
But also pulls double duty as our villain.
That's right. Yeah, he also voices Firebug, as well as he doesn't have as much dialogue either as you would think that the character would, but because he has this dissociative disorder or whatever it is, he talks to no one in particular in our opening scene, and then he's very timid and timidly tries to correct our domineering, teasing police officers that are doing everything they can to poke and prod him as the proverbial caged dog here. But he's I feel like he does exactly what he's asked. He's very clearly maybe are in the discussion for the most talented voice actor in modern history. So unsurprising that he's able to kind of pull off that double duty and completely differentiate himself.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Speaking of Peter Lorre, I wonder if he was like trying to affect an impression, because I think he had kind of that real quiet, raspy voice too. Or at least, again, that's how he was always portrayed when he showed up in a cartoon that I didn't understand the reference of until like 2 years ago. So I wonder if that was also a note they gave to him, is that, hey, that's what we're trying to evoke here.
Yeah. Be interested to hear that. Maybe we get some behind the scenes stuff here in the not too distant future. Some interviews once they start coming out from people involved. Also in this episode, worth mentioning briefly, we had Jamie Chung returning as Dr. Harleen Quinzel. She gets one scene to sort of be bubbly, and as we said, fill in a lot of expositional notes about what she sees and knows about her psychological profile of Batman. It's kind of fun. It's again, it feels at times, as I mentioned, like a very particular type of Batman critic that it exists in the real world, but that's nothing to say of a decent voice acting. She plays that bubbly persona that they really wanted to make that Harleen Quinzel persona kind of feel like she does it very well. And of course, we know that episode 5 is really where she gets her starring role. So we won't be covering that this month, but the next time that we revisit this series, we'll kind of get to see her more the alternative persona.
Yeah, can't wait.
Worth mentioning, also Lamb, absolute legend in every sense of the word. DCAU legend, Star Wars legend, voice acting, man amongst men. Again, we're just going to say probably in the discussion for greatest voice actor of all time, the GOAT himself, Corey Burton, is the first voice that we hear. Brainiac, of course, in Batman, in Superman the Animated Series, amongst many other voices. Cad Bane in Star Wars. He probably
Aztec, the man with double wrists.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Inside joke.
Forgot about that one. But yes, he's if you have had a cartoon on your television in the last 40 years, 30 some years, you've probably heard Mr. Burton and know his voice, especially if you're a DCAU fan. So it was nice to hear him back. As we mentioned, he was the first voice that you hear that opening bit where he's playing, now identified as Jack Ryder. He's kind of giving that voiceover, interviewing the citizens of Gotham on their opinion of Batman. That was the first thing you hear in the Caped Crusader trailer. So, of course, it was not a surprise to hear Mr. Burton back, but always nice to hear a familiar voice. And I will take any Corey Burton performance any day of the week. Briefly, I'll kind of just go through a couple more here. We had Kimberly Brooks playing Romy Chandler. We had Jason Watkins as Alfred Pennyworth. Briefly, I think he gets 2 lines or something like that. We don't even see him. He's just radioing Batman. Yeah. And then of course we had Gary Anthony Williams as Flass and John DiMaggio as Bullock. As we mentioned, they probably get the most screen time here, other than maybe Commissioner Gordon, who is played by Eric Morgan Stewart. But I think. You kind of get a set of opposites here, as we mentioned. We get Mr. Gary Anthony Williams as Flass, and then John DiMaggio as Bullock. They're really the antagonists to our main character for the episode, Mr. Stewart as Commissioner Gordon, as sort of the hero. So they get to play off each other. They get a couple scenes with each other. It's really Bullock interacting with Gordon for the most part, except for that final scene. But they're carrying the lion's share of the dialogue for this week's episode, and I thought that they all did a fantastic job. And I think specifically highlighting Mr. Stewart's performance, he really has that sort of. He's carrying himself as unflappable, I would say, to the world at large. But it's very clear that he's kind of doing his best to not bend under the pressure. But those moments that he kind of really gets to let his guard down and share with Montoya, we get to kind of see more of that interaction between those two characters, and we really see that he's not only concerned for himself and his own position, but he's concerned for Montoya, her position. He sees something in her, he sees value in her, and that's really communicated in that warmth. And then again, in that kind of closing scene where Barbara comes in, he takes that fatherly role to console her, like, hey, I'm not done yet. This isn't ideal, but I'm not done yet. So I thought his performance was outstanding, along with Mr. Williams and Mr. DiMaggio's performances. They get to be overtly, almost mustachingly, twirly evil in their dialogue, even in the midst of kind of those other police officers while they're can't believe that they have to be subjugated to a woman of all people and sit there and listen to another woman lecture them about a psychological profile on Batman. Very, very fun.
As far as Mr. Stewart goes, I think there's something, while listening to you talk, I think that's a really great point, is yeah, he doesn't, he doesn't sell the beating, the verbal beating he takes from the mayor. He tries to be real stern and matter of fact with Bullock and with Flass and a couple of those scenes. And like you said, even at the end, he kind of is trying to put on a brave face for Barbara. But there is that one scene with him and Montoya in the office where he's like, if this, like, where he talks about, I'm trying to fix this thing from the inside. I'm trying to make things better for everyone. And I can't do that if I'm transferred out to some other branch, to some other precinct. And also, if I'm gone, what's that going to mean for Montoya? Like, you see that desperation is there, as much as he tries to keep a lid on it and tries not to, let these outside forces know that he's being affected by it, and not trying to let them know that they're getting under his skin. You see it poke through in a couple of those scenes, and that's good subtlety from Mr. Stewart there. Letting that emotion sort of escape in those couple of small scenes along with the rest of the episode.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of some of those other small scenes, just briefly, Crystal Joy Brown returning as Barbara Gordon. Not a ton for her to do other than sharing some concern with her dad, both at Firebug being released and then that final scene. And then Michelle Bonilla also, as we mentioned, as Montoya back again. She's great, I think, because she also sort of mirrors that same sort of stoic personality in front of everybody, but then is able to kind of let that guard down and show concern with Gordon when she's interacting with him kind of just one-on-one. So I like that they kind of have those personas, that tough persona, but then you kind of see that human aspect. It reflects in both of those characters. So I like that she has that relationship with Jim where she feels like she can kind of let her guard down, and that's communicated in the performance that we see from Miss Bonilla there. But Dietrich Bader briefly, one scene gets his feels like contractually obligated one scene for Harvey Dent to talk about and critique the current mayor, and then maybe the least amount of dialogue altogether goes to our Batman himself, Mr. Hamish Linklater, who, doesn't, I think he says like 12 words the entire episode. He talks to Alfred, he talks to Gordon in that final sequence, and that's about it. I think he says stop to Firebug once. So not a ton for him to do there either. So nothing that stood out as far as his performance, good or bad. I don't think that gets like an incomplete grade.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so overall, I think with most of our score weighing on Mr. Stewart's Gordon, and then Mr. Williams and Mr. DiMaggio's Bullock and Flass, and then Miss Bonilla's Montoya. I went with a pretty strong score with mine. I went ahead with an 8 out of 10. I think really Mr. Stewart is the one that you look to as far as him interacting with all of these characters, and as we mentioned, some of that maybe some of the challenge of trying to emote being this like stoic character in front of most people, but then deep down having this set of pressures that are placed on you unfairly, expectations that you have, and how that weighs on you in private. So being able to kind of communicate that in that very unique way, I thought was pretty strong for him.
Yeah, I ended up giving it the exact same score, in fact, of 8 out of 10. So I think we matched in 3 of 4 this week for those that keep track. I think they're for all the reasons we've talked about, they're really strong. I really liked Mr. Williams, Mr. DiMaggio as well, for all the reasons you mentioned there. That final little line as they walk in on Firebug, and he's like, wow, I guess you were more dangerous. Like, it's so cold and so completely like bereft of any care for the fact that like they almost got him, like, dozens of people killed for this little stunt and didn't even catch Batman.
Right.
They didn't even do what they were trying to do by setting up this whole big charade in the first place. Like, they're so cold and uncaring. So yeah, there's some really good stuff from our cops, even as mentioned, if Batman is mostly absent from the voice acting in this one. So That will wrap us up and get us to our final scores here, Cal. And tallying everything up shouldn't be that hard since we had pretty similar deals. But I believe with my 1 point higher, I settled at a 29 out of 40.
Well, it seems by my math, that's correct because I ended up with a 28 out of 40. So I think that puts us it puts us lower than the last week and the week prior, but kind of in line with what we ended up with. Actually higher than the first week, but lower than the last 2 weeks. So yeah, that kind of tracks, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we don't really do traditional rewatchability because this is kind of one self-contained season. But I will just say, as an aside, I liked this a lot better the second time I watched it compared to the first time.
Agreed.
When I watched the whole series through kind of over that opening weekend, and I thought I didn't dislike this episode the first time, but I don't think I appreciated as much of the nuance as far as what they were building with the Gordon character, especially in this episode. So yeah, I think I appreciated it more, and just the sort of overt evilness of what Flass and Bullock do is really staggering upon a second watch, for sure. So with that, we will begin to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for listening, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or on the aforementioned Pod Tower YouTube channel. If you are listening to us on a certain app that lets you leave us a review or give us 5 stars, we would appreciate you doing that. The 5 stars alone is a big help, but we actually do a little bit of an informal contest where if you leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that lets you leave reviews, we'll actually send you a little gift ski. And in fact, Cal, I actually have a brand new review to read out this week on the show. So if you're listening, be sure to perk up because we'll need you to DM us with your mailing info because we have a little gift we'd like to send you. But this review is from Blaine 11111. Hey, you get points for leaving the review. I'm not critiquing your name. Anyway, it's 5 stars. The headline is "Love the Show." And the review reads, "I've been a fan of the DC animated universe for years and have really enjoyed the host's in-depth analysis and passion for the series are infectious and insightful. From Batman the Animated Series to Justice League Unlimited, they cover it all with their expertise and enthusiasm. Their episode-by-episode breakdowns are thoughtful and well-researched, highlighting the themes, character development, and animation techniques that make the DCAU so beloved. The host's banter and camaraderie add a fun and lighthearted touch to the show. Whether you're a longtime fan or new to the DCAU, this podcast is a must listen. It's like discussing your favorite shows with friends who share your passion. Keep up the fantastic work, and I look forward to more episodes." That is incredibly kind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
By the way, you can just write "good show" and the thumbs up emoji. But I'm joking though. That's incredibly kind. Thank you, Blaine. Like I said, you could reach out to us in the DMs on Twitter or Instagram if you would like, and we will send you a little gift ski if you're in the US. We'd be happy to, because that's really kind. Like I said, we know that does take a couple of minutes, especially if you're writing something like he did today. So really appreciate people that take the time. It does help the show. It helps kind of push it up in the ever important search algorithms and maybe gets a few more ears on the podcast. So appreciate anybody who does that. But again, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or the Pod Tower, that's a great way to support us, is by subscribing and liking and 5 stars and reviewing. Another more direct way you can support us is there are a couple of links in the show notes. One is to a donate button where you can buy me and Cal a cup of coffee.
Or donuts
for that matter, which is what I almost said. I was trying to push past it, but it's right. We should sit in it. But yes, you can buy us. You can make a small donation. We have a few monthly supporters, which we greatly appreciate there. And there's also a link to our store page in the show notes. You can pick yourself up a hat or shirt or mug or something like that. And we always appreciate people that chose to support us more directly with their dollars. It's a great deal of fun. We appreciate all your support. And Cal, as we begin to look to next week, we do have one more Saturday in the month of August here, and we thought, well, hey, we've been talking about Batman Caped Crusader all month. The show's been out for a while. We've reviewed the first 4, so why not for the last episode? It won't be a full traditional review, but let's just take sort of a top-down look at the rest of the season and maybe bring back, by popular demand, bring back the baseless speculation station and see and maybe talk about what we'd like to see in a potential season 2.
That's right, Liam. Next week we will be taking the week off from formal reviews, but you never fear, as you mentioned, we will be supplementing that with a bonus episode. So bonus episode will be our 5th review this month. We're already in the Elseworlds, so it's sort of an Elseworld bonus. I don't know. We've never done one of those, but yeah, we're going to be taking just series overview. We're not going to be in depth looking at every single episode. Obviously, we'll save the traditional reviews for more Elseworld months down the line, but we will take a look at the entire series as a whole. We'll discuss maybe some of the things we liked overall, what we didn't like, what we would like to see perhaps from the upcoming seasons, as you mentioned, and as desired and demanded by the listeners, bring back that speculation station to discuss what we could possibly see in season 2, which hopefully you don't have to wait too long for. I mean, it'll probably be hopefully it's around this time 2025 is what my hope is, but yeah, that's right. It's what we can hope for, but you never know in this day and age of content how long things are going to take. So yeah, we will discuss all that next week. It's going to be a lot of fun.
That is right, Cal. Can't wait to get into all of that. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU review.
Arrivederci. It's the first time we've signed off an episode with the